On today's episode of The Crow's Nest, we are joined here in the nest by a new guest. Her name is Maria Corvo, and she has spent the last 11 years working with people who have a variety of mental disorders and developmental disabilities. And on today's episode, she shares with us some of her experiences, some of the things that she's seen, some of the stories she's been told. And it was really interesting to me to learn just about a segment of our population of which I have very little interaction with. So I hope that you get something from this conversation. I know I did. But without any further ado, I want to present to you our next conversation. I hope you enjoy. Well, Maria, thank you for coming on and discussing this topic that I know that you are, for lack of a better word, you're kind of an expert in. You've worked in a particular field for almost a decade, I would imagine, at this point.
I would say at least 10 years.
Awesome. So just to start this off, can you give us a little bit of a backstory and a background as to what you studied and what you've been doing? Because I know you've worked a couple different jobs, but everything has been under the same or a similar umbrella. So let's start with that. Let's go to the backstory, the genesis of your career.
All right. So thanks for having me. I guess educational background. I got I went down a couple of different paths before I landed on social services and human services field. I got my associates in human services, which was a combination of like sociology courses, psychology, the basic, like psychology 101, and then like motivational interviewing techniques and things like that. And then I got my bachelor's degree in behavioral science, and similar, stream of courses, just kind of like more in depth. More work on how to effectively interact with people, whether it's on like a counseling level or case management, advocacy level. Currently going for my master's in social work. That should be done now by December because it was originally August, but because of everything that's going on, getting pushed back a little bit. So that's where we're at academically. Job-wise, my first job in the field was probably when I worked at Wood Services in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. It's a big residential, been there for like 100+ years, and it houses individuals of all ages, like to the elderly, who are dealing or diagnosed with or living with a large range of difficulties, whether it's developmental or mental health or things like that. So there I was doing job coaching with the higher functioning clientele that was there. We had a group that were kind of deemed appropriate for our program and to work, independently in the community. So we would try to find them jobs in the community, which was more on the job coach's part, really, because it's hard to get businesses and companies to be willing to take on, one of our people. There's liability, of course. You don't know how they're going to perform. You don't know if they're going to slow things up. But we got a couple of kids some jobs. I don't want to say kids, but one of them, his name was Tony. He had been there. When I was there, he was probably in his 50s, and he had been there since he was a child. And that probably just had part to do with just the time that it was, either his family not wanting to deal with it or having the money to be able to put him somewhere. But unfortunately, he was really there majority of his life. But he was an awesome dishwasher. Um, he was probably the best at Woods, and we ended up getting him a job at Cornerstone Bakery, I think it was called. It's a chain. It's something like that. As a dishwasher there, and he did really well. But the last time I got an update on him, he had kind of had a little bit of a meltdown at work, and he kind of expired his time there a little bit. But that's also because, I mean, there's nobody there at that point to really be there. Everybody's looking at him as an employee. So if he has an issue or doesn't understand something or is in some way triggered, it's not guaranteed that there's somebody there, understandably so, that can kind of like calm him down. And then for people who aren't sure about individuals who have those kinds of challenges, it can be scary. I mean, if you don't know, I mean, Tony was a big guy. Um, if you don't know what you're dealing with, I mean, that's intimidating. Like he could hurt you if he wanted to. So unfortunately, he ran his time there, but he was there for a pretty good amount of time and he did well. Um, but he ended up coming back to what he knew, and that was just being a dishwasher at Wood, where he had been his whole life. So, um, that's just one story at Woods. Woods was a very interesting place. Uh, I was introduced to a lot of things there. I, there's a lot of residential staff there, and I have mixed feelings about it because it's like there's always going to be good staff, and the residential staff are the ones that are there caring for them, getting them up in the morning, feeding them, changing them, depending on their functioning. That could be toileting them, um, bathing them, getting swung on every other minute, depending on the day. So you're really having to trust those people to to care for these individuals who may not be able to necessarily advocate for themselves. And that's scary because that's what makes them a vulnerable population.
So since you want to talk, Woods is a good jumping off point. Can you give a little bit more of a can you explain exactly what Woods is? Because I just in case anyone's lost that in translation. So Woods was a facility pretty much designed for people of varying mental disabilities as a home for them, a place where they could get full-time care. And in many cases you had either parents that couldn't afford to take care of their child, or they didn't have the time, so they put them there. Or, as it seems like what you're saying, is that there are people who, for whatever reason, either needed to be taken away from a situation due to maybe the situation or their own developmental issue, and this is a place where they would be offloaded and theoretically provided for.
Institution. Well, yeah, and we've moved past like uh insane asylums and institutionalizing. So it's not like one big building that's housing all of these people. It is a very nice spread out big piece of land, but it really is, the purpose is to, yeah, house all of these people and care for them. Yeah.
So how did you find yourself in this field specifically? Because like in this field, you can go in a variety of different ways, right? So you ended up starting your career in Woods, but before that, what made you, when you went to school, decide that this was the direction that you wanted to focus your adult energy on?
So it pretty much just came down to the fact that I feel like I do have the ability to level with people. I feel like I have I'm very non-judgmental. I'm very curious. I can be attracted to dysfunction in a way. And I mean, psychoanalyzing myself before, looking back, I feel like that's because we didn't really have dysfunction in our household, thankfully. We had a very, copacetic, normal, good, loving, fun household. And a lot of my friends had very dysfunctional households. And I often found myself like, the sane kind of like person, the logical person, the person giving advice. And I felt like I was good at that. And I just never really wanted to be in a position where I was expected to sell myself or sell something to someone. Whether, and because it's just all BS. I mean, and that it's all superficial and disingenuous, and you're just like politics saying whatever it is that you need to say in order to make that sale. So I'm not about that. I can't put on like a happy face and things like that. So I prefer to just be real. And I feel like the human services field was where I would be able to do that. I didn't necessarily go into the field thinking that I was going to be a therapist or really having any idea what I was going to do in the field. I just knew that I wanted to work with people in a setting where it was just authentic and real, and you know they would give me the chance to prove to them that I really am there to help them and things like that. So that's what got me into the human services field. I've always been interested in like, you know, abnormal stuff, like the serial killer stuff, the psychology stuff, the sociology stuff. Personality disorders are very interesting. There was always certain things um, that are just interesting. Like even if you're not in it and you're just observing it, I just find it interesting. So, um, yeah, when I was originally going for my human services degree, I didn't. There were populations that I did not necessarily want to work with, including developmentally disabled people. And my hang up on that population was that just like I explained earlier, very unpredictable. If you've never dealt with somebody, I mean, you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know what's going to set them off. You don't want to trigger them, obviously, and you don't know how they would respond to you when triggered. So for me, I always felt like I was kind of like vulnerable or like on edge a little bit because I didn't know. And the other thing is just communication. Like there's being able to convey my tone and my sarcasm, and if I'm, it's hard. I give people so much credit who
Yes, you're limited by how you
right.
can
You
communicate
have
because there's
right.
a definite.
Yes. Like you'll and obviously there's a range of that. Like people can understand you to an extent. Some people have devices that assist them in communicating because they might understand you, but they just can't communicate back with you. Some might just have no idea what you're saying. Um, and that's frustrating for me. And I don't want to be. I'm sure it's so rewarding when you get to where you're going and working with individuals who have developmental disabilities. I'm sure it's so rewarding, but I just don't think that I have the yeah, and patience. I mean, and it's nothing against them, and I wouldn't want to resent them if I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with them because I just it's not something. So I didn't think I would have worked at Woods, and because that's a very diverse population on all different kinds of functioning levels, and the less majority are high functioning. Let's put it like that. The majority are lower functioning. So I ended up working at Woods because I knew somebody who worked there. So Jenna McKinney had gotten me a job there, and I was thankful for that. It didn't end up being the best situation, but I worked there for like I don't know, at least I worked there for probably like 3 years. Um, and I ended up in my job position working with the higher functioning because I was responsible for getting them jobs in the community. So they had to be, capable of doing that. So I encountered and came across a lot of people there, but my direct job was with the higher functioning guys.
So along with this, what are some of the things that you learned while working there? Because I think there's probably a vast difference between what you would learn in a classroom about a particular demographic or a group or an ailment, and then actually being confronted by them and working with them for an extended period of time. I know from talking with you, you've conveyed stories of your experiences there, and some of them are wild stories. But I'm curious, after those 3 years, what were your what were your takeaways? Because you got kind of an inside look at probably a relatively large demographic of the human population, and I would say for most of us, we probably have views, let's say, on autism or different developmental disabilities, but for the most part, unless you have something like that in your family, you don't. Most of your data points are imaginary. It's what you've seen in a movie or a TV show. What did you take away? What did you learn? Because I feel like you, as you said, you treat them probably more, rather than treating them as someone with an ailment and treating them either better or worse, you probably began to treat them more, I don't want to say normally.
Yeah, but like I mean, you I feel like I address individuals varying, just like I address babies and little kids. Like I don't baby talk you. I'm not gonna baby talk your baby. Like I'm gonna talk, even if they don't understand what I'm saying. First of all, babies are very smart. I think that people don't give, babies enough credit. But I talk to them the same way that I would talk to anybody else. And I feel like that's just how I talk to everybody. Like, what I learned there, was I prepared? No, I was not prepared. They don't tell you in school that, just like in any other job. I mean, the first time I was given my tour around TWE, the warehouse at Woods, I'm like, I'm told, don't always have your back towards the wall. Always have your back towards the wall and always know, who's around you. Like, just be very, very self-aware. Because you don't know what kind of day any of these people are having. They could completely throw a full-on behavior. It could be because of something I'm wearing. It could be because of a perfume that I'm wearing. It could be absolutely anything. And if you're in a room, a warehouse no less, of just this open with tables area, and you're walking through to go see one of your clients to just, check in on them or whatever, you got to be like looking over your shoulder and keeping your eye on like Bob and Steve over here, because you don't know, shit does happen. Like someone could come at you from behind, whether it be physically or sexually. I mean, I've heard so many stories working at Wood, and it's just a matter of, you can never let your guard down. Even if you feel like you have a good rapport with somebody, they might completely go off on you for something that has nothing to do with you, or something that had to do with something that happened in the morning. It's just, I don't like being in that kind of environment. I don't like not knowing like what's going to pop off around me. And it's hard, especially with people, if you feel like, you've made progress with this person, and then the next thing you know, they're gnawing into your arm, and then 10 minutes later you're their best friend. That's difficult to not. Where are we going? I'm sorry. So do I think I was prepared? I mean, I think that the hands-on stuff, no, I don't. I mean, and a lot of the things that they talk to you about in psychology, and like, the fundamentals and the building blocks and all this stuff, that's great. Good to know how things came about. But did that prepare you to be able to de-escalate somebody who's at the peak of their behavior? We say behaviors when they're like having a crisis or anything. If they're freaking out, we always called it like having a behavior. So I think something that we learned that was helpful is being able to pick up on things, to be preventative, so you're not dealing with somebody when they're at their peak, because that's pretty much impossible to do when you talk to child therapists and behavioralists. There's no point in trying to reason with your child if they're at their peak of freaking out. They're not going to hear you. Just concentrate on them calming down, and then you can revisit what got them there and what they should or should not have done. Same thing with anybody who's, full on having a behavior. So tools and things like that to use in the moment, I think that just all comes with on the job training. I don't think that any of that came from schooling, honestly.
And do you think that your like natural disposition, like I'm curious, I kind of feel like, at least from what you're saying, I'm 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 curious as to how much you used on a daily basis the stuff you learned in class, and how much of it is just like your innate personality and disposition.
It's your innate personality. I mean, you have people who are going to you know, walk through a school at Woods that's filled with all of these kids and adults who, a lot of them, they want your attention. They want to say hi to you. They might not even know who you are. They just want like some kind of recognition. And there's some people who will just walk through a building and not pay any mind to anybody except for what they're meaning to do. And, that doesn't really seem very friendly. And then there's other people who are, hey, what's up? Yeah, like actually taking the time. Everybody's different. Um, and I think that shows a lot in terms of like watching someone and how clients like come to them and talk to them. I mean,
Do you think that a facility like that, because you worked there for 3 years, and I know you had a lot of negative experiences, do you think the way that we handle mental disabilities in our country or anywhere is the right way? If you could change the way this group of people is taken care of, or taken care of, what would you do differently? Or do you think like facilities like Woods are doing a good job and should be there?
yeah, that's so hard because it's like,
And it's a tough scenario. I imagine there's no right answer. But what are some things you would do differently?
right, because you got to think about it. I don't know. It's so hard because it's like the parents of these individuals who have these challenges, some of the things that they got to deal with, in terms of just parenting, and not even parenting. I mean, just like caring for, like you said, and helping them survive. Like sometimes it's just they can't do it. They don't have the ability or the resources to do it. So there are times where people are better off going into some kind of residential facility. And I agree with that. It's just, I don't see anything wrong with residential facilities. Um, Obviously, institutions and asylums, they went downhill fast, and that was just absolutely horrible, the conditions that people were living in. But to an extent, I feel like some kind of housing is necessary in some situations. Like, you have New Lisbon right in New Jersey that houses, this kind of population with mental health and developmental challenges. And they're also, a lot of pedophiles over there. So they're being cared for, but because of their, level of risk or danger to to society, they're really being, what's the word?
They're almost in a prison. It's a mental health prison. They're not allowed to leave.
Right. I mean, probably if they were typical functioning, they probably would be in prison. Yes, correct. So because of whatever else they have going on, that's where they're being kept or detained. So I feel like it is necessary. I just wish if things could work, and obviously there's always going to be bad staff. There's always going to be staff that are mistreating people, and that's why it's so scary. Because I mean, I would have never wanted one of my family members at Woods, and I worked there, and that's like horrible to say, but I bet you majority of the people that work at Woods would say the same thing, that they wouldn't want a family member living at Woods.
And is that because of the care people are receiving from like the staff, or is it from like the dangers of the other guests?
Probably a combination, because there is a lot of resident on resident violence or sexual stuff, or whatever. And you're also going to run into problems where, okay, you have a whole household of men, who are gonna live there their whole life, like, and not, they have hormones, like there's so then that leads to like then you get into like, okay, should these people be able to have families and have sex and reproduce, and it gets hairy, man. It gets hairy. Weird shit goes down. I don't know how much like you want me to like.
Well, no, I mean, you can go into detail. I don't want you to say anything like, I don't know if if this could hurt you in any way, but
Oh yeah, no, not at all. I mean,
I'm curious. Yeah, like, I mean, those are like the very viable things, because it's one thing to be, I don't know, have one of these disabilities and be 10 years old. And you're right. It's very different to be someone who is 60 living in one of these facilities. And I don't think the majority of everyday citizens who don't engage with the population understand that these people are adults as human beings. Like, their hormones, they have a sex drive, they not even rights, but they have desires just like any other human adult. And the question comes down to, do you allow them to exercise those desires, which is kind of a human right, or is it like, no, you're not allowed to, I don't know, love or have sex or, fill in the blank.
yeah. I mean, back to like the Prater Willie house, there was a lot of, roommate on roommate stuff going on. So, yeah, so not, and that doesn't mean that they were homosexuals. I mean, I can't say whether they were or not, but yeah, I mean, that's what was happening. And and there's also like the problem with masturbation. Like the way that I was told about that topic is that, like, cuz you might go into a classroom or you might go into a common area of a cottage or wherever, and like some guys just like whacking off, and you're not allowed to stop them because it is their right to do that, but you would either have to ask them to go somewhere else where and remind them what appropriateness is and where they can and cannot or should not do these things, and if they don't, then you cover them with something. That's it. So you're going into a place where you're dealing with all kinds of bodily functions. You got these guys who are, again, like I said, when they see you, especially if they like you, they're excited to see you. I mean, they're coming up to you. I mean, I had one of them he gave me a gift. I think it was like a loofah or something, and they want to touch you, they want to whatever, and you need to keep boundaries. It is all about boundaries, like boundaries. So I can't even stress that enough. Put it in the sand in the beginning, and do not be afraid to check them and remind them that this is your personal space. We already talked about this. That's your space. It's my space. We can elbow. I don't shake hands. I don't hug. I don't do anything like that. I don't want to give any mixed messages for anything. Does that always work? No. You still got people who are persistent or just may not understand, or may not care.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you was, do we tend to give people who are autism, do we not give them a fair shake in the sense of they're much smarter than we tend to believe? And sometimes, I'm curious, do they sometimes use their perceived disability to their advantage? Meaning they know what they're doing and they're just trying to act like they don't.
Absolutely. Right. Not even just autism. Just any one of them could be manipulative. I mean, and you find out the first time you get played, and you're like, damn, he just played me. Like, what? And then you completely change your outlook on that person. And really, maybe it's your own fault because you shouldn't have kind of assumed that they didn't have the intellectual ability to play you or manipulate you or trick you, but they do. So definitely not just autism. I mean, autism is so hard. It's just such a spectrum.
So what would you describe? Because maybe I'm using autism as a catch-all when I shouldn't be. How do you describe or characterize the people at Woods, I guess, as a whole?
I would say mentally and developmentally disabled. Um, so yeah. So you're dealing with people on understanding levels of all. I mean, when you go into the old cottages, you might be dealing with an 80-year-old woman and you might think that you're dealing with like an 8-year-old child. Like their developmental levels are just so all over the place there.
So have you ever asked yourself, like, has the thought ever come into your mind as to would it be better? It's a tough question. Would it be better in some cases for these people not to be alive?
Yeah. I used to hate going into Holland. Holland was the building there that it was the school building for the elderly people. So it really wasn't a school. It was, kind of like a daycare for the elderly people. So I hated going in there. I would go in there and, everybody was just in their wheelchairs and, drooling. It's like it was going into like a hospice nursing home. I mean, I don't know what the quality of life is. Personally, I would not want to be there like that. What is the point to me? But especially when it's like, let's say those people don't want to be, let's say this 80-year-old person is trapped in this body where they're like, they can't convey their feelings or whatever. They can't do anything for themselves. And in their head, you don't know it, but they're like, God, I just want to die. Like, why am I here? And it's not your fault necessarily that you're alive. And then you have to rely on somebody and maybe a burden on somebody, like a staff that's assigned to you all the time. And they might end up resenting you, and you're there like, I don't even want to be alive. Like, I don't even want to be here. I don't want to be a burden to you. Like, I don't know. It's hard to explain. Like, no, I would not want to be. Yeah, I agree with you.
I guess that's coming from two people who I can perceive themselves and have normal, brain functioning where, you know who you are, you can read the world a little bit better. I'm curious for people who have these different developmental disabilities, how they perceive themselves and how they perceive the world. Because all living creatures have, I guess, a desire to live. And I guess I wonder is if you are very, very, very low functioning, to me, it's almost like it would be easier to live.
Not know.
Exactly. You're ignorant.
Well, to not know that you're low function.
Correct. I think of like the Forrest Gump movie.
That's the worst. You're right. That's the worst. When you're just high functioning enough to know that you're low functioning. I would rather be ignorance is bliss. Yeah, ignorance is bliss. I wouldn't want it. But yeah, it is unfortunate when you are able to pick up on the fact that whether people are looking at you or treating you differently, or I can't imagine. It really does. It's really upsetting. Like,
yeah, it seems like a situation that there's no real right answer for, and that's the rough thing, because you see people who have, let's say, children with different, in some cases, severe mental disabilities, and I can't imagine what it's like for them either, because it's like, here's this child who I probably love because it's my child, and I can't even communicate with. I can't even, they are just a ward at some point. Like, I'm going to take care of this thing because it's of me, but it will never give me back really. I'll never be able to communicate with it completely. It'll never understand me. I'll never understand it. And it's like I take care of it out of familial love, if not anything else.
An obligation, in a way. I mean, I have actually a story that kind of goes with that. I ended up, so at my job now, I work for a children's mobile response, and we get calls, and we get calls from families that are in crisis, and the family defines the crisis, so we get a lot of different reasons for the calls, but no matter what, we go out there and we assess what's going on. We we get a whole bunch of background information, and then our job is to stabilize and put services in place, like an in-home therapist or a behavioral specialist, to assist the family and the child ages 3 to 21 on how to better function, whether it's because they're having behavioral challenges, emotional challenges, What they might have lost somebody, so they're grieving someone. Um, yeah, we get a large range of calls, which we can talk about later. But we got a call, and it actually ended up being a high school teacher of mine. I ended up going to her house for the assessment. She called for her daughter, and oh, it was so unfortunate. Like, excuse me. She was, I'm pretty sure she was always single. The my teacher, the mom, and she ended up adopting this baby from, I want to say Nigeria, when she was like an infant. So she was a single mom. She adopted this baby. Supposedly, the baby had had like a stroke during the first week of her life. So when I ended up going there, and it had been a very, very difficult upbringing, whatever. So I get there, and the girl, her daughter's now probably like 11. Um, and she presented as if she was on the autism spectrum. Like she could talk. I mean, she was functioning. She had no problem communicating. But she was just kind of like quirky a little bit. So I'm learning more, and I'm there. And of course, you're a new person coming into the house. So oftentimes with kids, a new person, they're going to show off. They're going to put on a show, whether that means that they're going to be acting out or they're going to be up their butt or whatever. So this girl she was all over the place. She went into the basement. She came upstairs. She had nail polish all over her hands. And the mom was like, "What did you do? Where did you do this?" And she's like, "I did it downstairs." Okay, so mom's freaking out. Mom's on the verge of crying. She got all over the carpet downstairs, and she's just laughing. The kid's just laughing. So then, and a lot of times when you're there and the kid starts acting out, the parent is very hesitant to maybe respond in the way that they would usually respond because they have a worker in their house. And God forbid somebody calls DIFUS on us and yada, yada, yada. And I looked at her and I was like, you do what you have to do. Do what you gotta do. Yank her up and bring her up the steps and put her in her room. Like, I don't give a shit what you have to do because that's exactly what I would do. So she's bringing her upstairs. The girl's laughing. She puts her upstairs. The mom comes back down. I'm sitting with my back against the staircase, and mom's over there across from me on the couch. All of a sudden, books are just flying over my head, and the girl's just throwing books at her mom, laughing. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do because I mean, I can't really hands-on do anything. I can be a support there verbally, but there's really nothing I can do or that I'm necessarily supposed to do besides verbal de-escalation. But this girl didn't give a shit about what I had to say because she was just targeting mom, which, as I learned from mom, was the whole issue, everything. She was just always out to get mom. She knew what things in the house were important to mom. She would break those things. She knew mom was an English teacher, and mom loved reading. She would rip books apart, like just things that were just, everything was towards the mom, and it was all with laughter, and mom was just at her breaking point. And this was just an example of a child that she adopted to bring into her life. She's never had a reciprocal relationship with her. I don't know if she's ever been hugged by her daughter. I don't know if, she's even able to have a conversation with her daughter that's a back and forth conversation. So not only to not get the affection from this child that, you took in, but to also be the target of everything, like all of her anger and just like maliciousness. Like, it was just very unfortunate. So it's like, how do you help someone like that? Like, that's the kind of situation where, yes, the kid needs support, but the parent, there has to be services and more resources and things in place to link the parent with, because you could put somebody in the household to work with the kid, and they might learn some coping skills, they might learn some emotional regulation stuff, but then when services end or therapy stops, the parent is the one who has to continue being able to manage the child and support them. So it's all going to regress and go down the shitter fast because the parent is really the one that needs to be trained on how to effectively support and raise their child without getting beat up or, resenting their child and just wanting to dump them in a residential. You know what I mean?
So, is there I mean, in that particular situation, are there techniques that can that parent become a better parent, or is it that this is one of those hard situations where it just sucks? Here's a parent that's probably a good parent, and then here's a child that's just not responding to anything that a normal, I'm going to say quote unquote normal child would respond to.
It's also hard though because it's like, okay, I can say she's acting this way because she's on the spectrum or because and honestly, they didn't say she was on the spectrum. They said that this was because of the stroke that she had when she was a baby. So she wasn't diagnosed with autism. But to me, she presented as autistic or on the spectrum because, I mean, that's how she just looked like she was on the spectrum and was behaving that way. And it's kind of like, how do you, right? So my kid has some kind of neurological challenge, but at this, so I have to give them, I have to learn how to be there for them and whatever. But at the same time, on the flip side, this girl is smart enough to know what's going to get to me, and she's purposely trying to hurt me. So it's like, how long can you kind of give the child the benefit of the doubt, or kind of like give them a bye because of whatever disorder they might have, to where you're just like, hell no, right? And not just that, I mean, that woman, she ended up going back to school for special ed so she could better deal with the daughter. It's just like she just did, that was just a case where she was really trying to do everything she could possibly do. And I've gone out on plenty of families where the parent doesn't want to do a damn thing. So that, it's like, okay, I get why your kid's a hot mess. But in this situation, it was just very unfortunate because she really had exhausted and tried everything, and it was just, she was getting beat up. She was getting beat up.
So, how do you maintain, like, I would imagine that in your field there's a high rate of turnover because I can see a person just becoming exasperated and giving up. So, how do you find your mental health being from these years of working in these situations that are just like very gray? There isn't a right answer. There isn't really a wrong answer. It's just like no matter what path you take, there's going to be a downside. Like take that example that you just described with that teacher. There may come a day where that teacher says, "You know what? I can't do this anymore. It's not fair to me. It's not fair. Maybe it's not fair. Maybe they think it's not even fair to the child. I'm not good enough. I'm not able to meet this child's needs." So they offload them into a facility. That's a situation that's it's still a gray area. Maybe that is the right choice. Maybe it's the wrong choice. Who whose life is of greater value? It's like, right, should that person, that teacher, for the rest of their days be in this like living hell, or do they owe it to themselves to say, hey, I did the best I can, and that's just not good enough to solve this problem? So how do you maintain your mental health? And this is kind of ties into a question I was going to ask, is that do you find that I would say that you're a caring person, but I also believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're also very good at not allowing other people's lives to fully, you know, correct. Like you're going to be like, you know what? That's a bad situation. I can feel for you, but it is what it is. And once the day is done, I'm not going to allow that to hurt me.
Weigh on me or anything. Yeah. So I mean, in terms of like work stuff, I I don't want to say I'm like desensitized because I don't think that, like, I didn't come into the field. I've never come home and cried. Um and I know some people might do that. And I don't know if that's because maybe like empath wise, like some people just take on other people's, you know, I I don't know, and maybe it's because of the whole dysfunction thing. Like I find things, I want to know more. Like I want to know what's going on. And I hate when people start crying during the assessment. That's really hard for me. Not because it makes me want to cry, but I'm like okay, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, there's only so much you can say. So, but no, I mean, I don't know. I just think I don't know. You know me. I've always watched like the first 48 and like dark stuff and unfortunate stuff and real life stuff. So I know that shit like that happens. And there has been stuff where I've encountered, situations where I'm like, whoa. I mean, and again, this isn't even like that. Just like, um, okay, so like I went on a call to, and I had my trainee with me, and it was on. She was, I guess, 13, and she was in DIFUS care. She had been removed from her mom. And it all pretty much came down to the fact that she had just had a baby, the 13-year-old, and her 14-year-old sister had also just had a baby. So it was kind of like, okay, what's going on here? And then it all came out that like mom's boyfriend was the father of both the babies, and like, and obviously they were removed, and it was just a hot mess. So that's all very, it's juicy stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like I want to know more. Like, oh, I want to go out on that call because I want to know what the hell was happening. So it's like you go out on those calls, and then you're looking at this girl, this 13-year-old girl, and you're trying to talk to her about this, and she's all smiles, and you're sitting there thinking like, how are you possibly like smiling about this? And it's because she loved, the baby daddy, like she loved him. And I've gone out on calls where it's hard to like wrap your brain around like how they are wrapping their brain around something and being cool with it. Like I'm gonna be with him when he gets out of jail, and it's like it's just a lot of like, I don't know. Sometimes you go out on kids and it's just like, what are you thinking? Like I don't know. I can't.
Yeah, I guess you're very right because human beings are just there's so much diversity in how you think, and something that would be to you and I be like very odd to someone else might make perfect sense. And in that particular example, it's like you don't know what makes sense. And I would ask the question is like, how old was the mom when she had the daughters? She might have also been very young. So in those kids' minds, it made sense. It's like, oh yeah, my mom was 16 when she had me. 13 doesn't seems like I'm almost right on trajectory to a scenario. But do you so like in that situation, it's you and it's this person you're training. How was their response? And how did that response kind of compare to your response?
So I mean, a lot of times, for the most part, it's just a very like,
Blank, no emotion, just
and I mean, there'll be times where I'll ask a question to like a kid or whatever, and they'll give me an answer, and I'll look at them like, okay, wait a second, okay, wait, back it up, because in certain situations, because you'll be talking to kids or families or whatever, and everything will be fine, and then they'll just pop something out on you out of nowhere, and you're just going to be like, okay, wait, like you'll be all the way through an assessment and thinking that this is the biological mom of the kid, and then they'll be like, oh, by the way, they were adopted, and I'm like, all right, well, we need to back the hell up because like that's important. um but that might not have really been on the forefront of these people's mind because it's just all they've known. But for me, knowing that kids who are adopted, there's some things that could come along with that, like mentally and emotionally. Those are things that I need to know, but they may not have thought that.
Yeah, but I'm asking is like if you go with a trainee, someone in your field that you're kind of showing the ropes, how do they respond to these situations that you guys are going to? Do you find that there's a period of time
Like in the middle of the situation, or like when we get in the car and we're driving home talking about it?
honestly both? I mean, do you find that there's a period of time that you need to kind of be in this field before you to get that kind of that thick skin, that scab, or do you find a lot of these people are more like you where there are
Throw them into it. Throw them into it.
and how do they respond? Do they get emotional at these situations? Do they cry?
I've never been with any. I've never had anybody. I don't think that I've ever talked to somebody at work who's become upset about a call. The only times that we've gotten upset and that I myself have gotten upset is out of anger, like getting off a phone call with like a parent or something and just getting chewed out or whatever. Um, but I don't know, and I don't know how people deal with things when they get home. Um, and I don't know what's going through the trainee's mind, in the moment. Because for me, they're just sitting there because they're shadowing. So depending on where they're at in their training, they may say more. Like in the beginning, they usually don't say a word, and it's just me doing it, and they're just shadowing me. And then as we progress and go out on more dispatches, they might start to engage a little more and maybe add their 2 cents in or ask questions that they think that I may have missed or whatever. So, and it really depends on the worker. I mean, you'll get workers who are fresh out of school and they dive right in there. But then you'll have like workers who may be in the field for like 10 years and they're still timid. So it really depends on a person and their comfort level. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny because you would assume or you would think that people who are in the, the social services would be or would appear very caring, very empathetic, very want to help people, and confronted by these situations, they would be you would imagine there'd be a period of time where they had to kind of process reality, right? It's like, here is a person young out of school who's like, I want to help people. This is my calling. I feel for people. I feel like I can connect to people and I want to help them. And then, flash forward, you're in the real world where you're dealing with situations like that, where it's, what is helping those two girls? If you really delve into that, it's a very weird scenario because you said they weren't unhappy. They didn't feel like they had been taken advantage of. And in many ways, they thought they were in a loving relationship with this guy. And now they're going to have his children. So I'm just surprised that you don't see more of, I wouldn't call it a breakdown, but that period of calcification where a new trainee is shown the ropes, shown reality, and there's that kind of like, period of time where they have to like change their world outlook a little bit. But it seems like that's not the case, that most of these people are already have the personality that gears them for this type of work.
Yeah, for the most part. But at the same time, like you said, there's a very high turnover rate. So that might not be the case either. I mean, the high turnover rate, I mean, I have a going list in my drawer since I've been there of the people that have come and gone at my job while I've been there. And all right, so it's on like a yellow notepad, not the big one, but like the next one. So it's like one whole column and then half a column. So however many that is.
A lot of people, over 10 probably.
And some of them are time, yes, oh yeah. Some of them are times 2 because they've come back and then they've left again. But I don't think that that's all because, I think that that's primarily because of the workload. I don't necessarily think that's because honestly, the majority of the calls that we're going on are not juicy ones like that. Majority of the calls that we're going out on are, we get calls for a 4-year-old who's being aggressive, or like their parents can't handle the 4-year-old, or before everybody was schooling from home, like my kid's not going to school, and we're just like, okay, like what? The family defines the crisis, so sometimes you want to roll your eyes, right? Sometimes you want to roll your eyes at the reasons that these people are calling, and a lot of times the initial reason for the call, you might roll your eyes at, and you might be annoyed that you're having to go out on this stupid dispatch. But then when you get there and you do the assessment and you're getting all of the background information, you're like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going. Like there is stuff going. But that's why it's good that we go out and do the assessment, because that's how we get all of the background information, like on family dynamics and like different areas, different realms of the kid's life and stuff like that. So.
All right, so a couple questions. When it comes to your new job, because you're dealing a lot with parents, right? Because parents are the one calling, or family members are calling in, expressing the need for help to meet a certain, or to solve a problem between them and a child. Do you find a pattern in that? Is it that a lot of these issues, how do I put it? Are you finding parents are not as prepared for parenthood as they might have been in the past? So a lot of these issues are problems where you're like, how can you not solve this? Like your child won't do X, all right? Make them do it, or punish them, or whatever. Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it more like these are scenarios that a parent of the 50s would have been like, oh, this is an easy solve. Like you do this. Like, come on, why don't you know how to do this?
Uh, that's hard because I mean, there's a couple of things. So you have parents who really have tried to do everything they possibly can. They've done all the right things. They've made all the right calls. They've tried to do, whatever. And the kid's just an asshole. Like that we get. I mean, that happens. Sometimes it's not the parent's fault, and your kid is just a douchebag. Um, but then you also have the other ones. Right. And in that case, you're confronting the kid with the parent. You're like, at least I am. I don't know how other people are on their dispatch, but like, and I have to say that families love, because I come in there and I have no problem putting the parent in their place, and I have no problem putting the kid in their place. I have no problem doing that. And I'll just be like, dude, because kids, I mean, you'll go out on some of these teenagers who are just so damn entitled, and it's just like time out. Let's how are you making any demands when you don't do anything, and like you calling your mom lazy, and she like, you just have to point out the obvious things and then make the kid look like feel stupid. Like, who pays for your phone? How do you have a roof over, like just the typical teenage stuff a lot of times we get. But then we get the teenagers who are really like swinging on their parents. And that's a situation where it's like our only recommendation that we can say is to call the police when that happens. But then you have like, okay, then the family's kind of torn. Like, do we really want the police coming to our house? Is that going to do anything? We've called the police in the past. They've talked to him. He's calmed down. Then they leave. Then it just happens again another couple days later. And then the police start getting annoyed with you. And like, we see that all the time. Like, parents don't want to call the cops, especially when their kid's like 11 and they're beating the crap out of them. And we're like, okay, well, call the cops. Like, we don't.
So I mean, I know when we grew up, we were spanked. There were punishments that were physical punishments. I don't think any.
I was thinking about this last night, honestly, and I'm trying to think. I want to ask mom and dad like how many times they think that they spanked us, because I don't know. I want to say it was like a handful of times.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually a real good question. I don't think they would know the answer, but I want to say it's in our lifetime less than 10. And 10 would be, I'd be very surprised if it was 10. But it's good that you brought this up. I'm curious, of the families that you go out to, right? Some you're dealing with kids that have known developmental disabilities. The parent knows it, you know it, it's a known quantity. But I was going to ask is like,
yes, but the majority of kids that we see are neurotypical. They're not developmentally disabled. So they know exactly what they're doing.
Got it. So what I was going to ask is, do you notice a lack of physical punishments in a lot of these homes?
Well, here's the other thing. Again, do these parents really want to be forthcoming and tell me that they hit their kid? So, and a lot of times the kid will try to out their parent as if they're getting them in trouble. Like, oh, well, that, we don't ask. We don't come straight out and ask, like, you hit your kid. But sometimes the kid will be like, yeah, Dad, you remember when you, like, smacked me across the face or whatever? And I tell the family straight up, I'm like, in the state of New Jersey, you can hit your child. You cannot you can only use your hand. You can't use an extension of your hand like a stick or, a spoon. You're not supposed to use anything else to hit your kid. And you can't leave marks. Otherwise, you can hit your kid. I'll tell the parent that right in front of the kid.
And what happens? How does the kid usually respond?
The kid shuts the hell up. So, I mean, and the parents over here, like, shaking their head, like, yeah. And a lot of times the parents don't know that. But again, like, obviously, you should never discipline out of anger. You shouldn't be trying to hurt your kid when you're disciplining them. Like, obviously there's guidelines and things to that. But the other problem is that parents are afraid that their kids are going to make allegations and get CIFIS involved because they do that. And another thing that I tell kids when I go there, and it's in a situation like that where the kid has made allegations and lied, I'm like, dude, you're not understanding. You're not gonna go to your friend's house. You're going into the system. Like, you don't know what kind of family you're gonna get placed with. You don't know anything. Like, kids don't understand the repercussions that could potentially come from that. I mean, God forbid, like, the allegation was false, and they come and search the house, and they find, like, geez, these days they're taking kids away for marijuana. But let's say they found some cocaine or something. Bam. You just got taken away. And who knows when you're going to come back. It's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to get placed with family. So you're getting put in a stranger's household. Kids don't get that. And that's why it's nice that we do have a feature, which we're not really utilizing right now, obviously, but it's what we call a host home. So it's the option, depending on the kid and the presenting behaviors, we can take them out of the home and put them in like a temporary home for 30 days. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but at least it gives the parent respite and a little break from whatever that they were dealing with. But then honestly, I've gone out on kids who wanted to get picked up by DYFS, and I went out on a kid that the mom told the kid that I was going to be DYFS taking her. And I told the mom, well, that's not what we do. That's not who we are. You would have to call DYFS and figure that out. But we're coming to help stabilize the situation so that the child doesn't have to be put out of the home. So that's what we're doing. So I was like, so please let her know that when I get there. This girl was like 9. I get there, she's got all of her bags packed. Mom didn't tell her because mom was and this girl was thinking I was going to take her, and I had to tell her, like, break the news to her, like, no, I'm sorry, like, I'm not taking you, you're staying here. And, yeah, so you got kids that want to leave their house, you got kids that probably should leave their house. Are there enough support and resources for parents? No. But there's not even really enough resources and supports for the kids either, so.
So in your job, because I know your job is not a government agency, but it works kind of in conjunction with different agencies. What do you think about the government, local or federal, and how it relates to like what you do to, in your case, like parents and children's relationships, developmental disabilities? Like, do you see any like large gaps where you're like, this is where like the state should be doing X, or this is where the federal government should be doing Y? Like, what is your takeaway?
I mean, there's so much I could say about that. I mean, when it comes to state, which would be, DYFS, DCPMP, um, they don't do enough. But at the same time, like, I can't judge because I don't know what their caseloads look like. I don't know how much work is being expected of them or how many families they're being expected to manage. The fact of the matter is that DCPMP often refers to us to put in place the therapy. DCPMP doesn't like to always be forthcoming about the services and things that they have access to because they don't want to do the work. So they often punt to us to fill that gap. I feel like a lot of times, and it always depends on what DCPMP worker you have, but I do feel like there are a lot of things that they could probably be doing to assist their families that they don't want to do. And maybe it's because they don't have the time and just straight up don't have the resources to do it. But that's what I found with that. I mean, obviously the issues with DCPMP of like, removing kids from their parents and then placing them back with their parents when maybe they shouldn't have, or, things like that. But then again, there's hard because as soon as you remove a child, you now need to find a placement for them. Well, that's not guaranteed that you're going to have placements for them. So, like foster parents and things like that. So I get it. It's probably a mess over there too at DCPMP. They probably don't know how to handle everything either. For the developmentally disabled, there's a division for the developmentally disabled. So to access DD services, you have to fill out the DD application, which is a very lengthy application that wants a whole bunch of tests and evaluations and things that you've gotten done for your child. And then you submit all of this stuff and they deem your child DD eligible or not. If they are DD eligible, it's supposed to open a door of more DD specific services, like ABA, which is Applied Behavioral Analysis, which is like just a hands-on person that's there to help with just like the functioning, just daily functioning depending on their level of functioning. So it's frustrating because you need to have all these evaluations done. well, what happens when you got a lot of grandparents caring for their grandchildren, so grandparents don't know what the heck's going on, how to use a computer, how to access things. You have the language barriers because we get a bunch of Portuguese speaking families and Spanish speaking families who don't understand the DD application or anything that has to do with that, but they might really need help because their kid's severely disabled. You have people just don't know about the DD application. And it's unfortunate because you have people who have been dealing with their child with very severe disabilities and now they're like 9 or 10 and now they're finding out about this DD application when they could have probably been DD eligible for like the past 6 years. Like, I don't know. I just feel like there's gaps in terms of like communicating and informing. Like, school child study teams should know about the DD application. They should be telling these parents that they should fill out the DD application. Primary doctors should know about the DD application. They should be referring to that as well because the sooner you get those services, the better. So, I don't know. I think there's gaps all over the place. And I don't know what we would have to do to, fill those gaps, but it's just miscommunication or just lack of communication. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy. It seems that there is no system, no perfect solution. It's a very much a how do I it's like I can't solve the problem. It's just a matter of how can I get to like 90% solution rate, if that makes sense.
It's also impossible to get really an appointment anywhere. So let's say a family wants to fill out the DD application and or wants their kid to have an IEP in school, and the school is saying that okay, well they need to get a psych eval. The DD application is saying that you need to see a neurologist, you need to see a whatever and a whatever and a whatever. Like you're calling these places and there's like 6 to 9 month waiting lists. Like it's just even for families who are trying to get the services, there's so many roadblocks and obstacles that just come with the lack of services and not being able to necessarily effectively address the volume of kids who, whether they're DD or just have behavioral and emotional issues, there's just not enough services. Bottom line, which is because our services that we have at my job are meant to be short term. Okay, so the idea is that we come in, we open up for 8 weeks, we put services in place, stabilize the situation, and then hopefully transition them, whether it's to like outpatient where they're going to go like every other week, or they're stabilized and they don't need any more services right now. The problem is that it's so hard to get those outpatient services that it ends up being just like a revolving door of the same people coming in through our services because we're free, we're guaranteed pretty much, we're home-based services. I mean, who wouldn't want our services? But it kind of defeats the purpose because people try to use us for long term, and that's not what we're there for. We're supposed to be short term. There's just nothing really out there that we can like in a timely manner link them to.
Do you remember watching a movie a long time ago? It was with Val Kilmer, and he's a blind man, and they cure him of his blindness. He can see. You remember that?
Yeah, right. He was a masseuse, right?
You remember the movie better than I do. I don't remember. I don't know if he was a masseuse. I just remember he was a blind guy. They give him his sight back, and then he falls in love. There's like that story, and then at some point he almost like I forget the reasoning, but he wants to go back to being blind. He becomes kind of overwhelmed, or there's some issue, and he seeks to go back to what he was as a blind man. And I was curious. I was thinking more about autism specifically, but I guess this is broad. Do you think, this is just a random question, if you had the ability, the superpower to go up to someone with one of these ailments and boom, you're gone. It's whatever that is, whatever the origin of that problem is, boom, you're gone. You're normal now, quote unquote normal. Would that person be that person anymore? Or is it that, with these people that are autistic, even the high functioning ones, is that their identity? Is that who they are? And it's kind of like you can't even solve, like if there was a cure, you wouldn't be curing them. You would be turning themselves into something else.
It's hard. It's hard because you don't know how much of the autism is branching through their personality. Like, what's causing what? You don't know. So that's hard. That's a hard question. I don't know. Now, developmentally, like that kind of population where it's just like functioning, like just being able to care for yourself. Yes, I would love to change them in a second. But on the spectrum, like it would all depend on where they fall on the spectrum. Like if you're thinking about what's his face from Community, then it's like, I mean, didn't his personality change at one point? Right? When he was normal, quote unquote.
Well, that was an act, so he was acting normal.
It depends on like, I know. Right. But it depends on like how, I don't know. That would be hard. And then it's like, okay, would the person resent you then for taking that part of their personality away? Like, I don't know.
So here it is. We have a society, right, where certain qualities are either a necessity or will give you an advantage within the system that we live in, right? So being able to see, that is an inherent advantage. Being able to process data, to be able to think logically, to control your emotions, all of these things are kind of necessities. Like they help you survive and thrive. And then you have this other populace that perceives the world to look at it favorably, they perceive the world in a very different way. And it's unfortunate that the way they perceive the world is not in line with our system.
Yeah, because that's what makes them different. But really, what if we're different?
Correct. So I guess I'm curious if correct. And I mean, remember, back in the day, they used to call these people touched, right? Because it meant you were touched by the angel. One foot was in our world, and then the other foot was in another world. And that's how they used to describe these different people. But I'm curious, like, if there would be a way to create a system that leveraged their abilities rather than trying to fit them within our system, where no matter what, like that guy you mentioned who was 50 years old, the best we could do for him was make him a dishwasher. And that was considered a success, right? Because it's taking what abilities he did have that worked in our system and saying, all right, in our system, all right, you can do XYZ, so here, we can put you in and make you a this. So I'm curious. It's like the Rain Man scenario, right? That the guy in Rain Man, he could.
But that also brings you to, what did they do with Rain Man, in theory? They took advantage of him.
But Rain Man never felt taken advantage of, did he?
I know. Well, no, I don't know. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't taken advantage of. Just because he didn't pick up on him. And, I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I understand what you're saying, but it could go, depending on who was tapping into their strength. Obviously, it could be, for good or evil. But, yeah, that would be cool. Because then they would be, like, successful.
Yes, because you'd be letting them do what is in their nature to do. It's just a matter of, it would be us trying to figure out what it is in your nature to do. Like what do you have inherent ability in that, in what ways do you have an advantage over me, right? And let's figure out a system for that.
But at the same time, do you ever think, like, there's so many things that we've never tried doing? You could be a freaking savant, like at any sport, an instrument, who knows what's out there that you just never tried doing that you were actually like a natural, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, what if it turned out I could have been like a freaking amazing drummer if I had just tried drumming? I just never knew.
Yeah, and that's even like not even so obscure, but there's just so many things that human beings do and have done that, yeah, you could be, who knows, if someone had given you some archaic Chinese instrument, you might have been, for whatever reason, the way your brain operates, you could have been the best in the world at this particular instrument or this martial art or this fill in the blank, whatever it is. Yeah, but you'll never know. But that is life, right? Because you just don't have enough time to figure out or to try enough things to 100% figure out beyond a reasonable doubt. Oh, I've tried everything. This is the one thing I'm amazing at. And maybe in the future, maybe there'll be a technology answer where we'll be able to. So I had an idea. I wrote this down actually. It was for teaching. Right. So, what do you think is the best way to learn something in your own experience?
Observing and hands-on.
All right, it's trying something and doing it, and then you learn it because you do it. Right. You're using your hands. You're seeing it.
Trial and error, yeah.
So it's like if you were going to build something, you can read about how to build it, but usually, at least for myself, the only time you finally can check that box off of I have learned it is usually when you've done it with your own hands, right? It's like softball. You played softball. You could read a book about softball, but that's not going to make sure you're not going to know how to catch a ball or throw it.
I don't like learning anything from reading.
So I had an idea, and I imagine it's being worked on now. Is that if there was a way to accelerate that, almost like the Matrix, where it's like, what if education was just what we just talked about? It was, I am going to, in 4 years, I am going to expose you to 1 million life experiences in a short period of time, like virtual reality. Like we're just going to, every day, you're going to go into a scenario, and it's no more book reading. It's just accelerated life learning. Like you're learning by doing. And in that way, you could maybe be exposed to 1 million different occupations and try them until you figure it out. Oh, I'm good at this, right? Because right now you don't have that opportunity to really, you have the lack of time to be exposed to enough things.
Right, like you can think of something, you can think of something and be like, I think I'd probably be good at that. Or no, you could think like, I don't know. That would be cool though. That would be so much easier. But are you saying that that would be something that could be tapped into like as a baby at any time in your life? You could like tap into that, like, or do you have to hit like a certain, you know, amount of years lived before we'll be like, all right, this is what you're meant. This is what you'd be good at doing.
No, I mean more like, let's imagine if when you started to go to school, right? You start to go to school at, I don't know, 4 years old. So imagine high school. Let's imagine you're 14, 8th grade, right? Imagine 14 years old, school became, every day I'm going to be bombarded by 100 different scenarios. And that's what your education consisted of, right? Let's say you had to learn mathematics for whatever reason. Rather than learning from a book, you're put into these simulations where those skills are necessary. So every day you are learning by doing. And that same idea could be used for classes as well, for jobs and careers. It's almost like if you remember Star Trek, the holodeck, where you're going to do simulations. And in doing that, you can rapidly figure out things that would take a normal one lifetime.
Right. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So we've been talking for nearly almost 90 minutes. Is there anything anything left to be said? I mean, we could definitely talk about the subject many, many, many times. But are there any stories, anything that you think summarizes your experience in this field, or any like takeaway ideas that you wish people knew or considered when thinking about mental health, developmental disabilities, how you help people that are suffering and going through this, both personally or as a family member? Is there any final thoughts that you have?
Well, that was a lot. Well, first of all, just to kind of like, mental health, everybody deals with it. There should not be a stigma. If you're ever feeling some type of way or going through something or whatever, don't let like anything hinder you from trying to be well. Who cares what people think? Mental health, everybody deals with mental health. You're just hurting yourself more by not, accepting it and feeling like there's an issue with it. Anyway, I don't know. I guess I don't know. Definitely just be empathetic to people's situations. If you don't know what they're going through. Yeah, I don't.
Well, and maybe this is a takeaway. If you are going through something like this, or you have a family member, definitely take the time to check your government and see if they are providing services that you can take advantage of.
See what's available. Absolutely.
Well, Maria, thank you for joining us for this conversation. I know that you know a lot about this field and you speak well about it, so I appreciate.
Yeah, I know that was a lot of rambling. Sorry if it was a lot of like.
No, I don't. I think you were on point.
Okay, good.
And I learned a lot
All
because
right, thanks.
very few people. I think people have opinions on this subject, but very few are in it and work in it for a long period of time and have seen varieties of scenarios play out. So it's a good learning process. I know for me because I've heard more stories about this subject because I've talked to you more
Right.
times than this.
Yeah, you've heard a lot.
And this makes you also appreciate people like you who do work in this field because it takes a lot. And I would imagine there's a lot of gray area, and a lot of times there is no perfect solution. It's just what is the available solution, which for the most of us we don't understand and don't
Right.
truly appreciate.
Thanks for having me.